of my report counselors. Those of you that have been here a while know that it's time for TID 101. We do this every year. This is, I can't remember if this is my idea or not. I'm frequently wrong about that, but it's a good one anyways. Tax increment districts are incredibly complex policy, but they're one of the most significant policies that we use for economic development. Recently, they've also had pretty significant bearing on tax policy. Well, there's a number of reasons. For example, you all know taxes went down. I got my bill today, actually. One of the main reasons is the closure of TIF districts. So whether you have seen this several times or whether this is your first time, we're all going to learn about the actually, not ironically, very exciting world of tax increment financing and the accompanying districts. Mr. Sirk.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I'm just going to introduce Sean here.
Don't be brief. Do it the long way.
Well, Sean is going to do the presentation. So essentially, yes, some of you have met Sean Lentz from Ehlers. He's our financial advisor here, as well as Bob Tofty. He is our redevelopment authority attorney. I'm going to try to get this to work here in a little bit, but essentially, this is, Mayor's right, we try to do this once a year when we are in the process of doing TIF district creation. So we are there right now. We are looking at creating what we call TID number 18. It's in the area of Raven Crossbow, as well as New Perspectives, and will involve a new construction of a funeral home, full service funeral home, in the area, which is item 8.22 or 8.12. So I'm going to introduce Sean here. I'm going to try to get this to fit the page. I'll do it. And ask any questions he has. The presentation is also in front of you as well. And without further ado, Sean. This one. Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Jason mentioned, I'm going to talk with you about Tax Increment District number 18. But in doing so, as the Mayor alluded, we're going to also talk a little bit about how tax increment financing works in general. Oops, am I doing this right? Let me try this one. Yeah.
It did work. I think it's that it's the PDF.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay. So just as a starting point, when we're looking at potentially within the city trying to facilitate economic development and or redevelopment, one of the first steps is finding an area that the city would like to focus on. And for creating a tax increment district, it needs to be a contiguous area. And the key is looking at that area and determining, well, what is it that's maybe holding development or redevelopment back? And then when that determination has been made, what tools are available to us? And as the Mayor had mentioned, tax increment financing is a very powerful tool to really focus the new revenue that's created from a site, from redevelopment, on paying for the costs associated with really getting that project and or projects to move forward. Now, this next slide is really the main item to understand how tax increment financing can work, because it really focuses on how is the revenue generated to be a specific dedicated stream to really target the goals of economic development or redevelopment in an area. So when we pick a district, and as Jason described, here's our current proposed tax increment district number 18, we calculate what is the current taxable value of that property, and that's the base value of the tax increment district. From there, that base value is currently being taxed by all the taxing jurisdictions. So the county gets a share of tax revenue off that value, the city, the school district, and the tech college. When you create a tax increment district, what's unique is the value gets frozen in terms of revenue that each of the general funds of the taxing jurisdictions collect revenue off of that value. And any new value, which is called increment value, represented in purple on the chart, any new value up and above that base value within the tax increment district, it's taxed at the same rate as everybody else, but instead of that value going to each of the individual taxing jurisdictions, it all goes to the city, but it's not for any expense that the city would potentially use tax revenue for. It's dedicated specifically to do economic development and redevelopment goals and expenses in the tax increment district or within a half mile of an area around the tax increment district. So the long-term goal is to take the current area and through applying this tool, potentially doing incentives or infrastructure improvements, creating new value, which is reflected in the purple section of the chart, also maybe potentially providing new job opportunities, new business opportunities, new housing opportunities. All those can be goals of a particular tax increment district. But from a tax value standpoint and providing long-term revenues for all of the general operations of all 4 taxing jurisdictions, when a TID has paid back the costs to create that new increment value, all of the taxable valuation eventually comes back and becomes part of the tax base for the city's general fund, the school districts, the tech colleges, and the county. So while foregoing revenue during the time that the TID district exists, in the long run, all jurisdictions are getting increased value that likely would not have been created, or maybe at a much lower level, had the tax increment district not been a part of the process to make that happen. So any questions on that before we get more into the specifics of the new proposed district, District 18? Okay, great. So again, wanted to come back to District 18, and on the screen, you can see the area, the district, as well as an area half mile around. And what we're looking to do with District 18 to promote development in that area, redevelopment in that area, is we're likely to need to incur some costs on an incentive basis to get the business expansions and the housing development to move forward, as well as the funeral home that was mentioned. And to do some infrastructure improvements both in the district as well as within a half mile. So we're looking to encourage development and redevelopment of a residential, commercial, and industrial or manufacturing basis. And the type of district that we're creating is a mixed-use district. There's a couple different types: industrial, mixed use, and blight. The best fit here, since we have a combination of residential and commercial, potentially some manufacturing, the mixed use is a perfect fit where you have to have at least 50% meet those findings, and we basically have the whole district trying to achieve those goals. And as I'd mentioned, when we create a plan for a tax increment district, we need to put projects and budgets for the types of expenses that we expect the district and the new revenue stream from the district to pay for. In this case, that is utility street improvements, as well as incentives to work with the businesses to have their projects move forward. Now, the actual project expenses in themselves and the incentives, by being in the TIF plan, and should the council approve the tax increment project plan, that allows those expenses to be paid for by tax increment district number 18. But each of the projects or development agreements individually need to move forward through the normal city process. So just by being in the TID doesn't mean projects are automatically approved. You still, as a council and the mayor, will look at those individually and approve those individually. Okay, again, the key by being in the project plan is it allows this dedicated revenue stream to pay for those expenses. Now, as we look forward over the life of the tax increment district, a couple charts ago, I had that purple section, which was new increment value. So that the idea is that new increment value, and in this case, the funeral home, residential development in this area in the future, expansion of the crossbow operations that are there currently, potentially a little bit more commercial development in the area as well. We're hoping to see an increase in value somewhere hopefully around 12 million up and above the base value that is there currently. And the goal would then be to get that new tax revenue from that new valuation. And we projected that gradually can go from 25,000 in new revenue up to, if we get the full close to 12 million in value, up to about 237,000 a year in revenue coming into this special tax increment district number 18 fund. Now, how do we see that revenue being used? It's to be a combination. I know the current funeral home project is moving through the process commensurate with the creation of TID 18, but we would also see the city entering into development agreements for the housing, the crossbow, and a potential future commercial development in this area. What we typically do as a city with those types of projects is we have development agreements that state if the partner that we're working with creates new value in the TID and incurs TID increment eligible expenses, site development or redevelopment as examples, the city agrees that if they build their building and create a new tax revenue, we will collect that revenue in TID number 18 and pay it back to them. So we call that a pay-as-you-go incentive. And that allows them to leverage that revenue stream that they're going to get in the future to assist with their upfront expenses that they have with moving the project forward immediately. As well, over the life of the district, we also expect some infrastructure improvements in the district and within a half mile. Those projects will be much more driven by the normal city process for doing infrastructure improvements. And we have preliminarily put it in here as a potential financing that instead of being paid back by the general tax base and the general tax levy of the city, it would be paid back from annual revenues that are flowing into tax increment district number 18. All told, those expenses will be paid back over the life, maximum 20-year life of the tax increment district, per the projections that we have at this point. But as I'd mentioned, these decisions on moving forward with any of these projects, really starting with the funeral home, but all of the rest of them, they will come through a normal process of getting council review. And we work with city staff on analyzing what is the cash flow as we move through the tax increment district, and what are the risks of moving forward with projects to ensure that we're using the revenues of this district to pay it and hopefully not having to tap into any other resources of the city, really focusing those expenses on tax increment district number 18. Finally, there's a process we go through to create a district. We're a little bit more than halfway through the process right now, and this is why we're bringing it to the council this evening. On November 16th, we had an initial meeting of what's called the Joint Review Board. As you might imagine, because this involves capturing tax revenue that normally would go to all the jurisdictions, the Joint Review Board allows all the taxing jurisdictions to have some say and discussion about a tax increment district creation. So we had an initial discussion with them, much like we're doing with the council tonight. We also had a meeting of the Plan Commission on the 16th. They heard the discussion that the council's hearing this evening and approved a resolution moving TID 18 forward for discussion by the council. Today is the council's kick at the can, so to speak, of creating TID number 18. And should you decide to go forward with approving the boundaries and the project plan via our resolutions that have been prepared, on January 11th, we'd have a second meeting of that Joint Review Board, and then they will have a vote on the tax increment district creation at that time as well. So, Mr. Mayor, with that, I'll turn it back to you and any questions that you might have or the City Council.
First, are there questions about this tax increment district or tax increment districts in general before we take up the resolution? Councilor Johnson.
As a teacher, I just wanted to say thanks for the lesson in 101 and making it pretty easy to understand. So I
Appreciate that. Thank you.
appreciate the easy to understand just a couple of questions on some of the specifics. First, I notice on the map outline in the current Raven Crossbow area, there's a section cut out. Is that for an existing business already?
Is that this, I'm gonna try
That
to,
little corner
here?
right there, yeah, that little
I
spot there.
believe that's the,
That's
yep,
the
that's Taco Bell, yep.
Yeah, okay.
We don't expect that to get any better.
No comment. And then you mentioned in here on page 6, the street utility infrastructure project financed with a general obligation bond. I guess my only concern is, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'll say it out loud. We could potentially be on the hook for some of these if these projected numbers don't reach where we're looking. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, it is. One of the points I would also make to the council, you have a very good group that monitors these tax increment districts very closely. We had a meeting with your new finance director, finance staff this afternoon prior to today's meeting to talk about the tax increment districts. Your districts are in very good shape. But to your specific point, absolutely. And so what we strongly encourage, the plans are important, getting the district moving is important, but it's the implementation that's the key. And before making any decisions on investments like infrastructure or otherwise, it's very important for the council to understand the current status of the TID and any risks involved with moving forward with projects. Could they be and have to be paid by sources other than the tax increment district? As an example, too, in the plan, we're showing it as a general obligation bond financing for that. Yeah. Because Superior has strong finances, we might even look at an internal loan, might be another way to handle it. But in either case, the key is analyzing what's there and what the capability of the TID is to pay it back to ensure that before we make a decision.
We're not going to be left held in the bag.
Exactly.
I appreciate that.
Can I just clarify that? Because there's two types of that risk. So in this case, this is pay-as-you-go financing. So the development agreement obligates Mr. Cushman and his company to build that project. So the risk in that case is that the project's value doesn't realize the way we expect it to go. So while that risk does exist, we're talking about professional assessment here. But your question hits on a type of risk that some municipalities, including at times Superior, have undertaken where you pay the money up front. You assume everything's going to go well, that there's going to, in some cases, you don't even know what the development is going to be, including this district. Yeah. If we were to bond against some future imaginary development, which conceivably we could do, the risk is much higher there, but that is not what we're doing.
And you stole my second question there, is the pay-as-you-go. So I appreciate you updating me on that. And then the last piece, I'm assuming that the initial joint review board gave a recommendation to approve this?
They don't do that at the initial meeting.
Okay.
Although I will say they were very favorable of understanding what we're trying to achieve. And I didn't, always interested in Jason's thought, but I didn't have any questions come our way that felt like, ooh, maybe they're not real supportive of this. So I think you've had a great joint review board to work with in the past, and I would imagine that that's going to be the case with District 18.
And then, sorry, I'll try and keep it close to short here. I know that, like, the half-mile district, is the Superior Middle School within that half-mile radius?
It's got to be close. I don't
It's
think
got-
so, though.
Isn't it, right? But then, okay. I'm just thinking about, would then the school district somehow be eligible to help or for any infrastructure that they incur because it's within the district?
Well,
Does that make sense?
is almost always, the infrastructure we invest in is almost always at or below grade. So if we're talking about things like streets and sewers and that kind of stuff, then yes, we can do projects like that benefit the school district. Okay. What we're unlikely to do is meet one of their obligations for them.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
And there's actually some specific provision in the law that you can't build a new city hall or a new school building with tax increment revenue. So there is some limitation to that, just as the mayor was pointing out.
And then lastly, Raven Crossbow has been a great employer in our city, and I've heard some rumblings that they may even be looking to expand their operation. Is that part of this discussion then as well? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you. We have existing TIDs right now, and successful. Can the successful ones that are producing revenue in excess of expenses, can that money be ever taken out of TID 1, I'll just say whatever the number is?
Yep.
And applied to number 18?
District 18, as a mixed-use district, is not eligible to be a recipient. Under Wisconsin tax increment law, the only type of districts that can be recipient districts are blight
Like in kind.
elimination districts.
Okay.
Correct.
And thank you. My other question is, we can cover all the administrative costs borne by the city. That's part of the costs that go into this increment district.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Whether it be finance, human resources, public works, mayor's office, all those costs are germinated within this district.
Yeah, typically the community historically has tracked expenses of an administrative, creation, legal nature.
Right.
And then per their accounting system, they'll be charged to the tax increment district.
Correct. Thank you.
Counselor Herrick.
Yeah, could you just educate me more a little bit on the half-mile buffer and what exactly that entails? I mean, why do we have that buffer?
Yeah, this wasn't, the half-mile option was not originally in the TIF law, but sometime back, the state trying to be a little more open to different projects. So any type of expense, infrastructure, incentive, acquisition, any type of expense that's eligible for within the boundaries of the tax increment district can also be eligible within a half mile of the district, as long as the half mile is within the city's corporate boundaries. So hypothetically, if you had an infrastructure improvement that was within the boundaries of the tax increment district and consistent with the goal of promoting mixed-use development or redevelopment, you could do that type of project outside the district, but within a half mile, using funding from the district. The one thing that's different, a project, let's say you did a project to create a new business outside the tax increment district. If you do that, the new tax value that's generated outside, or the new value that's generated outside the boundaries, taxes on that new business don't go to the TIT. They immediately go to all the taxing jurisdictions like they would anywhere in the city. So but you are allowed to incentivize a project like that if it's within a half mile of the boundaries of the tax increment district. Yep.
We historically have not done a lot of that work. A lot of cities, this is their capital improvement plan. This is how they build streets and sidewalks. However, we've started doing it recently. The next major project that you're going to see out of a TID is actually 28th Street, because it runs along that Barden Avenue, or now Acadia project. We're going to use some of that TID money to just improve the look and feel and redesign, put a little road diet on 28th Street. And it's one of the things I'm most excited about for next year. It's going to have a beautiful new street using only Acadia's money. Other questions?
I do have one.
Please.
Sorry. How long does this TID last?
This district as a mixed use, the maximum term is 20 years. So the first 15 of the 20 is the time period the city can incur costs and charge it to the fund.
Thank you.
Yep.
And again, that's max. They can be closed early if they meet their obligations. Yep. Any other questions about TIDs or about this project? Thank you, Sean.
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.